G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Those of you who've been watching my channel for any length of time are aware that I'm a bit of an aeroplane nut. Those of you who've been watching it for quite a long time are aware that I like to mess around with small, cheap, radio control flying machines. This has a ducted fan on each wingtip and it's controlled by asymmetric thrust. These are literally the simplest and the cheapest radio control planes available. And I really enjoy getting out and messing around with an aerodynamic toy. And yes, it's under my control. No, it's unlikely to do any damage to anything at all if it hits anything. It's not like a boomerang, which is made out of hardwood and has really sharp edges and considerable mass and might actually hurt you if it hits you. The style of radio control planes that I use, they're harmless. But there are other people who use bigger and more powerful machines. Some of them use piston engines, burning methanol and castor oil to spin their propellers. And whereas this has an electric motor spinning a ducted fan, some people use actual turbojets burning kerosene. And some models are quite large. Some of the larger models, they weigh 10, 20, 30 pounds, and some of the faster models fly at hundreds of miles an hour. So there's always been a concern among some members of the public of what would happen if such a model was to go out of control, fly away and hit something or somebody. Not an unreasonable fear. And when I used to fly those El Cheapos inside with my son when he was a young teenager, there have been occasions when we've been flying in moderately close proximity to a busy road when I have become quite alarmed at the position and direction that his model was taking, because it was quite possible that it looked as if he didn't do something real soon, it was going to go out onto the highway. And what a person's legal position is if their radio control model goes in through the windscreen of a vehicle on a public road and causes the driver to swerve and run into somebody on the oncoming lane, it's a nightmare. So the radio control model industry has formed itself into clubs which have organised insurance cover, and they have instructors, and there's a whole bureaucracy dedicated to controlling radio control planes. And as far as I'm aware, they're fairly successful in administering their industry in such a way as it hasn't caused a large number of casualties. Right, so 5 years ago, I suppose, stories started to come out about people who'd fitted miniature video cameras onto their radio control planes with miniature transmitters coming back to miniature screens inside goggles, so that these people can fly their plane while looking at screens on the inside of their eyeglasses, and they can see what the camera on the plane sees. This is called first-person video. And it's probably 2 years since I first saw an article in an Air and Space Smithsonian magazine concerning first-person video. And sadly, the people who dreamt it up never thought to go to the government and say, look, this is our first plunky effort and we know we're going to get a bit better at it. Can you write us some legislation which allows us to do this? It's a tactic which I am familiar with because I used to fly a very early ultralight aircraft. It was in fact a minimum aircraft. If you want to see it, search 8 horsepower 1975 Skycraft Scout. You'll see it. It's hanging in a transport museum. The bloke who built that back in 1975, he invited the Department of Transport Air Safety Bureau to come and look at what he'd done, and he showed it to them And he said, "Can you see any reason why I should be stopped from doing this?" And they looked at it, and it was bright red, and it had white panels on the wings and the tail, and it had black Maltese crosses on the white panels, and it had an 8 horsepower lawnmower engine. And there he was sitting in this red Baron lawnmower crossed with a hang glider. And the bureaucrats were laughing so hard they couldn't think of any reason why he shouldn't be allowed to do it. So they went off and they wrote Air Navigation Order 95.10, which was gazetted in August 1976 after his January demonstration of the device. And Australia became the first place in the world where it was legal to fly around in uncertified aeroplanes as an unlicensed pilot, as long as you didn't annoy anybody. That meant no crossing roads. It meant no flying inside municipal areas, not within 5 miles of an airport or controlled airspace, not above 300 feet from terrain, no overflying public meetings, races or regattas. But basically, if you wanted to mess around with it, go out of town and have fun. Alright? And that opened the door not only for minimum aircraft, but as the weight limits came up, you got ultralight aircraft and you got recreational aircraft. All because the first bloke to do it had the foresight to go to the government and ask permission first. What's happened, in my view, with the first-person video movement is a bunch of people who were already flying their model aeroplanes with radio control, found they could fit a video camera, and they took the stance of, well, there's no laws against it, and because there's no laws against it, they've gone out and they've pushed their little envelope. Well, where have they pushed themselves into? Here we see the front cover of January 2013's Air and Space Smithsonian. And as you can see, it's covered with depictions of unmanned aircraft, which is what the manufacturers want everybody to call them these days, because drones have really bad connotations of little things that whine away in the sky and then blow you out of your armchair with a Hellfire missile, because the US Air Force has thousands of the bloody things doing that in countries all over the world. And of course, the manufacturers are very keen to get large military contracts. And Air and Space Smithsonian is always quite keen to bang the drum of US patriotism, so they give quite good coverage to that angle. In preparation for potential Pentagon budget cutbacks, the unmanned aerial vehicle industry is eager to shift to civilian markets, and after years of silence on the subject, Congress last February ordered the FAA to open the skies to drones in September 2015. Although there are many hurdles to cross between now and then, I came away from the AUVSI conference with this much: pilots, you've got steely-eyed competition. The FAA has focused its initial UAV rollout on small craft under 25 pounds, which include almost 150 models made in the United States. So this is just 11 of the 150 models that are available in the excited states. And you'd have to admit that if you want footage of what's happened to one blade of your wind turbine array, it's going to be a whole lot quicker and cheaper if you pull one of these things out of the back of your car and fly a camera up to have a look at it, than if you've got to ring up somebody who has a helicopter they can sit in and get them to come and pick you up and lift you up into the sky, so you can see what's gone wrong with your windmill. When the Japanese at Fukushima Daiichi found out what happens when you're too dumb to set your nuclear facility up so that the heat of the fissile material is capable of running its own cooling water through a thermosiphon, and you blow the place to smithereens with hydrogen explosions, you use a drone to go and have a look and see what's gone wrong. Find out what's happening out in the middle of the conservation area without disturbing the animals. They use drones. If you just want to dangle a camera somewhere, multicopters. pretty popular. You can buy them in toy shops and fly them off your iPhone. And in the excited states, it's the law enforcement agencies who are the keenest to get these drones. Probably they want to go looking in everybody's backyard to see who's growing what. And of course, vast numbers of people are fantasising on putting a drone in every soldier's backpack as long as they can make the drone. Who knows how much money there is to be made selling these things to your local councils, as well as any other organisation or individual who wants to be able to look down without actually sitting in the sky themselves. And when it comes to making movies of high-speed action sports, a drone is capable of going places that a helicopter with somebody sitting in just could not reach. And these things have autopilots, they're gyro stabilised, they're GPS enabled, they're capable of holding their position and attitude against gusts of wind. So you don't have to be particularly good at aero modelling to fly them. All you have to have is enough money to buy the things, and they're increasingly cheap. However, as the 2nd of March's New Scientist shows, they're also increasingly unpopular with people who don't use them. Most normal people have got the idea firmly in their head that if they look up and they see an aircraft, they can see it clearly in the sky, then any cameras or people on that aircraft are obviously able to see them just as clearly. It's a fallacy, because one aircraft in the sky is the only thing to see, and the world is a big place and it's full of lots of detail, and when you're actually up there, there's so much stuff to be looking at that it's hard to figure out what you can see. However, drone backlash begins. Privacy fears are fueling the US public's rejection of civilian drones. The first guy who uses a weapon to bring down a drone that's hovering over his house is going to become a folk hero in this country. So said commentator Charles Krauthammer on Fox News in May last year, after the US FAA said that drones will be licensed for law enforcement and commercial surveillance work. Krauthammer's words seem to have captured the mood of a nation. Privacy fears are sparking a backlash against the use of drones in civilian airspace. Seattle's police force was forced to abandon its drone program last month following anger from residents. Meanwhile, Virginia has imposed a 2-year moratorium on the use of drones by police, and at least 13 other states are now deliberating similar anti-drone legislation. But some privacy advocates have gone beyond lobbying their local councillor. Online discussion groups have sprung up about what kind of drone countermeasures could prevent privacy invasion from the air. The ideas range from the absurd, wearing drone camera-proof clothing, or using stunt kites to tangle their rotors, to the more plausible, jamming radio frequencies or shooting the drones out of the sky. The FAA's announcement on 14 February that it's pressing ahead with the opening of 6 test centres for civilian drones will only have reinforced such sentiments. After Krauthammer's comments, pro-gun shock jock Alex Jones ran a video on his website, Infowars.com, which shows him visiting a sprawling Texas ranch to practice shooting down the coming wave of drones with assault rifles. Steve Hindy of Geneva, Illinois, who runs an animal rights charity, has first-hand experience of what happens when those being watched by a drone decide to do something about it. He uses 8-rotor drones, which cost about $8,000 each, to expose a controversial type of pigeon shoot, in which birds are ejected from a box on the ground and shot with a shotgun. Quote, "We've had drones shot down, losing one permanently, and twice more they were hit but made it back," Hindy says. He flies his drones beyond shotgun range, but says the shooters are switching to rifles to down his drones. Mr. Krauthammer is completely wrong. The shooters are like the people who wanted to ban the internet in case people learned something, he says. They are not folk heroes, they are cowards. So what happens next? A shake-up of the law is needed, said Peter van Blyenburg, head of the drone trade body Unmanned Vehicle Systems International based in Paris, France. He says small drones like the $300 Parrot AR drone sold as a toy could become a real neighbourhood nuisance, provoking risky shoot-downs. Big Texas landowners now talk of firing shoulder-fired rockets at drones, he says. They're in cloud cuckoo land. In May, the European Commission's remotely piloted aircraft systems panel, on which Van Blyenberg sits, will investigate if the rules that govern radio-controlled model aircraft can be enforced on users of, quote, toy, unquote, drones. This could go some way towards addressing the concerns of privacy advocates, Van Blyenberg believes. Quote, model planes cannot take a camera anywhere near to a house or garden, he says. If they do, the operator can't get public liability insurance. That could apply to these toys too. So, it's a work in progress. But, if you're into FPV and you'll take a fool's advice, then stop trying to publicise how simple and how easy and how cheap and how foolproof these things are until after you've already got some kind of a legislative framework in place, so that instead of saying, oh, there's no law against it, and stirring up the sheeples out there in cities and land to try and prevent it from happening because there's these people out there without any legal authority and they're doing all this perving and spying, get yourselves in a position where you can say, oh, the law says I can do this, this, this and that, and stick within the law. Because at the moment, the kind of groundswell that's blossoming and the kind of homeland insecurity fears that the Yankees have, because it's a paranoid place, I wouldn't be at all surprised if they don't start talking about, well, you know, you're going to have to ban all these radio-controlled aeroplanes because somebody might put a bomb on one and fly it with first-person video into a hospital or a school or a building. It's not impossible for such a thing to happen, and the Yankees are a paranoid race and they're into preemptive legislation. So yeah, FPV is threatening RC, and I reckon the FPV people should pull their flaming heads in. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.